Welcome to Harmony Talk, a podcast about dreamers who fulfill their goals, dreamers who become doers. We chat with people from the arts, industry, science, the world of social impact, and more. This podcast is brought to you by A.M. Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Lisa Champeau. Today, our guest is Jay Jacobs, the CEO and founder of Timberlake Camps Family Group, which owns and operates 3 sleepaway camps in upstate New York and Pennsylvania, 3 day camps on Long Island, a day school, a facility rental company, and 2 picturesque country inns. Jay is also the founder of Scope, Summer Camp Opportunities Promote Education, a program that sends inner-city children to camp. Jay's dream from very early on was to own Timberlake Camp, the cornerstone camp of the organization. And to this day, he is very involved as the executive director. Jay is also a leader in the camping industry. He has served as president of the New York section of the American Camp Association and past president of the New York State Camp Directors Association, 2 distinct organizations. Jay also happens to be the Democratic Committee Chairman of New York State and the chairman of the Nassau County Democratic Committee on Long Island, both very powerful positions in a politically significant state, New York. We'll chat about that in relationship to his camps, how he manages both. But first, let's dive into the dream. Welcome, Jay.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Jay, you started going to camp at a very young age, 2 before Timberlake at age 9. But when you got to Timberlake, you were entranced. It was magical. Tell us about your early attraction to camp, and particularly Timberlake.
Well, Timberlake's on a beautiful setting, a beautiful piece of property. And I remember, and I was, very young, going up to Timberlake Camp and arriving on that first day, taking a look at it. And there was something about it. And it was a bit crazy, I think. I would tell my bunkmates and others that one day I was going to own Timberlake. And people would laugh about it. It became kind of like a lighthearted, fun kind of a joke in camp for a while. And all of a sudden, the joke became a reality.
Well, why was that camp different from the earlier 2 that you had attended?
I can't tell you exactly. I know the other 2 camps, I was much younger. I started camp actually at, I think, the age of 6. I got to Timberlake at about 11. So I think at that point, maybe I was just more developed and thinking more about the future. When I was much younger, I guess it just wasn't something I focused on.
Well, I think you've also talked at times about your family life and how going to camp offered a kind of a safe space. Did you find that at Timberlake?
Yeah, well, my mother left when I was 9, and she left during the middle of the summer when I was at camp, and I had no idea that there were any problems. When I came home, only my father was there to pick me up at the bus. And frankly, I didn't get along all that well with my father to begin with. But he explained the change in circumstance. Of course, it was a blow, and it was, a very rough time going on. And then from that point on, I would always count down the days to camp because it took me away from my home life to some place that was a lot better. I found a lot more acceptance and less stress at camp. So I always loved the camp experience.
Well, I am trying to grab hold of the magic here because I also feel that you have said in the past you weren't particularly athletic. And, camp, of course, focuses a lot on things like tennis. And so what was it at camp that you found that really appealed to you?
Well, I wasn't an athlete, and that made it a lot tougher. I was also a little bit overweight at the time, and kids are mean. There were those kids that were mean. There were some times that were tough at camp, but I got through them. And the main thing about camp, I feel, is that you were able to be yourself, and, you had an opportunity to make friends. And it was the friends, the relationships that really carried me through at camp. And I would have to say, endured over the long winter where I'd be looking forward to getting back to those friends. I think it's those relationships that really put it all together.
You didn't grow up wealthy, as I understand it, but in 1980, when you were in your early 20s, you fulfilled that dream. You managed to buy that camp. Now, how did you do that financially?
I look back and I say to myself, I wonder, if I could do it again. It was really quite difficult. I had saved money. I had numbers of jobs, and I was a miser. Where my friends were all buying things and what have you, I would be writing down every dime that I spent. It was kind of, again, a little bit crazy, but I watched my dollars, and I opened up a bank account at Chase Manhattan, and every time I got a paycheck, I was depositing it. Well, it got to be a point where, my father, who, again, I lived with, wanted to get into an investment. It was a small, closed investment group, and he needed $20,000, and he only had $14,000. This was in the late 70s. I guess I was in high school. And so he asked my brother and I if we'd chip in $3,000 with him each. and we would own 15% of what his investment became. Well, I went in, my brother went in, that 6,000 brought him to the 20,000 that he needed as a minimum to go in. And lo and behold, a couple of years later in 79, when I asked my father how much it was worth $28,000. And that's what I used as the down payment on the camp. And so, the owner financed the overwhelming majority of it, of course. I took a 14.5-year mortgage, crazy thing as it was at the time, about 8.5%. But the down payment was very small, and I was able to buy a good stake in the company at that point. And after the first year, I bought out some of the partners and had a majority.
Wow, you were financially savvy even at that early age.
Well, I was in law school also at that time. The reason I was able to get the down payment down to such a low amount is because I helped the owner who wanted to sell out of a tough, tricky tax situation he was in. So I went up to the law school library and worked all night one night on some of the tax issues, came up with a solution that was a little bit creative, saved him an awful lot of money, and in return, he lowered the down payment, enabled me to have a bigger stake in the whole thing.
Wow, now I know you went to Northwestern Law School, my alma mater, just saying, but you didn't take the bar. You didn't pursue that in any way. Is that correct?
I intended to, but that first summer, the bar is typically in July, the first to go around. The next one I think was January, February, I don't remember. And I couldn't do it in July because I was going to be up at camp and working camp, and I intended to do it that next winter. But things got so busy, I put it off again. And before you know it, I'd put it off a couple of years. I felt I didn't have the need to do it. I was making good money in camp, growing the business, and then beginning to look at other camps and other camp properties. So, circumstances just take you in different directions sometimes.
Well, you're leading right into my next question. I understand that your cottage in the center of Timberlake Camp is called Ponderosa, after the Cartwright family in the old TV series Bonanza. So you went on to buy all these other camps so that this became your Ponderosa. How the heck did you do that with a 14-year mortgage on the other camp?
Well, the interesting thing about it, we should cover that Ponderosa thing. As I mentioned, my father was a single parent. He was out most times. Sunday nights, he'd be out on a date, and I'd be at home alone. And Sunday nights at, I think, 9 o'clock on NBC was Bonanza. And I would watch that show, and it was a show about Ben Cartwright. He was a single parent. He had a couple of sons. It was out in the late 1800s on a beautiful big ranch. And I would sit there and daydream about one day I wanted to own a place like the Ponderosa, and I wanted to have that kind of ranch. Years later, after I'd bought Timberlake, not thinking much about it, when it came time to design the home that I was going to build in the middle of camp, and I had made most of the design ideas, drawn them out, I got an architect, and he began to sketch it out in a lot better detail. He looked at it when he got finished with it, with the log siding I wanted and everything else, and he said, what this looks like? He said, it looks like the Ponderosa from Bonanza.
He actually said that.
He did. And it struck me, and I said, gee, I'm looking at it, that's right. And so we named it the Ponderosa, and you know what? It looks like the Ponderosa. So I guess sometimes dreams come true, and maybe you make them come true. Buying the other camps, well, I had made money again. I saved, and I had an idea in the late 80s. When I bought Timberlake, we did 4-week and 8-week, and I felt that didn't work well in terms of the quality that I wanted for the campers. I found that campers would make friends, and then their friends would leave halfway through the summer, and we just didn't have the re-enrollment rate that I wanted. So I decided to make the camp, because we built a demand up. I made it an 8-week program exclusively. That meant turning away 4-weekers, but I continued to see a strong demand for 4-week. Friend of mine through the camp industry, a friend of mine, Harold Lauren, owned Lincoln Farm Camp, which was about an hour from Timberlake. He wanted to sell it. I ended up buying it from him and making it into the first exclusively 4-week program on the East Coast. And I said, it's all the fun and half the time was our tagline for that program. And so we started the 4-week program at Timberlake West. I renamed it Timberlake West. A couple of years later, Maury Stein, a friend of mine, also in the camp industry, was looking to buy Tyler Hill. He couldn't make the deal, but he'd asked for my help. I had given him some advice and didn't work out. And then I asked him, I said, would you mind if I pursued it? And he was most gracious. He was a great guy, Maury. Died way too young. But with the material he gave me, I negotiated the deal in a day. And I ended up buying Tyler Hill, and then, other camps followed.
Just kept rolling along there. Were they all 4-week camps?
Well, no, Tyler Hill actually was a direct competitor with Timberlake. 8-week camp or full season camp. Now we're down to 7 weeks. But full season camp, I bought it because the property was beautiful. Each of the properties that I've purchased or built have been not so much out of the desire to just accumulate more camps or make more money. It was that I saw a potential in the property itself, and I felt I had a marketing niche that I could pursue and put it all together to, make something successful.
Let's just talk for a second about that marketing niche. Now, you mentioned earlier the 4-week camp. What are some of the other things that string these camps together and that perhaps you innovated? Because you have been called innovative, and I believe you were one of the first to have staffers wear uniforms and with logos.
Again, I thought branding was very important from the earliest days. When I bought the camp directors were teachers and they were part-time camp directors. I went into it full-time. There were very few full-timers. And then I began hiring a full-time staff, and I would bring the full-time staff with me to the Tri-State Camp Conference every spring. And I was the only director that brought a team of staff members. I'd walk around, they called it the entourage, I didn't mean it to give that impression. It just did. And now, of course, Tri-State Conference is full of camps that bring their staffs. But the benefit of all of that and professionalizing the camp operation was we were able to brainstorm amongst each other. And as we built and grew it and had more and more camps, you had more people brainstorming to find the best ideas. And we came up with our character and values program really very early on in the mid to late 80s. The Starfish program started. That was a program to build character in campers, understanding that, you're not just going to get recreation out of the camp experience. You're also going to get some meaningful character development, learn about values, and teach children certain things they weren't getting at home. And that became a foundation of all of our programs. Now, all my camps have the Starfish program. It stands for sportsmanship, tolerance, appreciation, respect, friendship, integrity, sensitivity, and helpfulness. So that program, I think, was fairly innovative, and other camps have certainly adopted their own variations of it subsequently. And then, programmatically building on the electives program and putting it in concert with a strong athletic program. I always said, and I still say to this day that I'm known across the country reputationally as the least athletic camp director who owns an athletic camp. But I promote athletics, but always in the confines or under the umbrella of good sportsmanship. I want to make sure that we're building character, and that competition isn't just for competition's sake. You got to learn how to win with class and lose with grace. And these are the things we're teaching children. I think that's gone a long way to building, a strong base of parents and campers who want to come to our camps.
The Starfish program, which is very interesting, do you provide incentives for kids to actually achieve those goals in the program?
There are weekly recognitions. There's a ceremony every Saturday evening, and there are recognitions that are given out. We promote it throughout the day in our program. Starfish is an important part of every sports program. Coaches are aware of it. The referees are aware of it. We're expecting a certain type of behavior. We don't permit trash talk. When we have intercamp games and visiting camps come and are playing, let's say, basketball, and there's a foul and they've got to take a foul shot, different than what you'll see in collegiate sports or professional sports where the home team makes a lot of noise to try to distract the person taking the foul shot from the other team. We're dead silent out of respect for them. And there's certain things that we teach our campers. You do your best and you're going to do just fine. You don't have to tear anybody else down. That's not what our camp's athletic competition is about. And yet we compete vigorously and we win more than our share of the games. And we do so, I think, in a manner that we can all be proud of.
You wrote a piece called There's No Place Like Home, after The Wizard of Oz, of course, and There's No Place Like Camp. And in that piece, you mentioned that adolescents they reach an age where their parents' praise and encouragement, it's not as great as it was earlier. And they look to their peers and their perhaps camp staff. Can you elaborate on that, how camp offers that?
Well, parents, if you think about when a child takes their first step, for the parents of that child, it's greater than Neil Armstrong taking his first step on the moon. It's as if nobody else has ever achieved it but their child. And it should be that way, by the way. And life goes on that way. So the child, over a period of time, I think doesn't necessarily become immune to the praise, but comes to expect it. And the value of praise really diminishes when it comes from parents because it's just so over the top all of the time. That's in healthy relationships with parents and children, as it should be, as I said. At camp, however, when a child goes away and it's their coaches who, just met them or are just getting to know them and certainly are not expected to love them with the unconditional love of a parent. And a coach compliments a child or the camp director does it and points out great things that they're doing, that positive motivation that we try to build into our program and every part of the camp experience. The impact on that child's self-esteem and self-confidence is way greater than what the parents can deliver after a point in time. So I think that the camp experience really is designed to build a child's self-confidence, self-esteem, and resilience, the ability to bounce back, while we're also teaching the social skills, I like to say, of, learning how to make friends and keep friends, two separate skills. So that's what I think is a tremendous advantage of sending a child away to camp.
All of which sounds absolutely terrific. And of course, you're there day to day. You see the campers. Surely, though, there must be, I hate to say it, but some bullying. How do you handle bullying?
Children were mean back in my day, and that hasn't changed. Sometimes it's not necessarily bullying, it's just nastiness. Excluding somebody. Is that bullying? No, but it's nasty and it's bad behavior. Well, we're on top of that as best we possibly can. We're not perfect. I don't want to, give anybody the sense that, we're running a perfect camp, that nothing ever happens. Kids don't curse on the basketball courts. Yeah, they do. From time to time, we'll hear words we don't want to hear, but we address it immediately. And we have certain expectations. I know when I'm walking past a basketball court, if a camper, blurts out a 4-letter word, usually beginning with F or something along those lines, and they see me, immediately they apologize. It's like a natural. No one curses in front of me. And I certainly don't do that. But in terms of bullying, we're very tough, and even nastiness. If there's a child who's giving other children or another child or even counselors a hard time, we're on it with them, and we get their parents on the phone very quickly, and we have got a rapid process so that if it's not improving and we can't see that there's going to be the kind of improvement that we're expecting, well, that child's not going to be at camp for long. And we're aggressive on that. Now, I'm not expecting perfection from children, but I am expecting improvement and the ability of children to be able to live together with one another respectfully without messing up somebody else's summer. What I tell people they don't understand about camp, and this is what makes it unique, different than every other business. You think about it. There is no business like the camp business where a customer's satisfaction is 80% or more predicated on other customers. In other words, it's the other customers, the other campers that either make or break a camper's summer. So we've got to be really on top of those other quote unquote customers in order to make sure that each camper is going to have a great experience.
You must have a really well-trained staff. I mean, how do you train the staff to look for those things and to inculcate in the kids those values and so on?
Well, not only do we have a strong orientation program about a week to 10 days before the campers get there, but we also do evaluations. My division leaders, a division leader is in charge of an age group on the boys' side, different division leader, of course, on the girls' side, et cetera. So the division leaders have 3 different evaluation periods. We've developed a very, I think, well-perfected evaluation, scored evaluation based upon our starfish values and behaviors and doing things we want counselors to do in camp and caring for children. Those evaluations are also linked to a bonus program. So, where we don't allow tips in camp, we do give cash bonuses above their salaries, their contracted salary. We're unique in that. And I find that's been very effective because it increases the importance of the evaluation, both in the minds of the evaluator and the counselor being evaluated. And it rewards counselors for the kinds of behaviors and activities that we'd like to see them engaging in. So I find that helps us translate what we want to have happen into actually what happens. Again, not perfect, but I think you see, a real impact because of that kind of a program.
And it sounds like something that your camp offers. Now, camps have certainly evolved since you first went to camp. I mean, I doubt circus was a part of camp when you started out. Camp can be very competitive. How has your set of camps evolved?
Some camps do have circus programs. We have other programs, of course, the adventure course and the rest. You have to keep up with the competition in terms of facilities. Our facilities, are always being improved. We put a lot of money into capital, but we also like to have creative programming, creative program ideas. And I find that most important, and one of the things I learned from Ben Applebaum, who was a great day camp director and frankly, bought one of the camps that I had been to previously after I had left that camp, was Echo Lark at the time. before he went into the day camp business. Ben Applebaum taught me early on that it wasn't so much the facilities that are going to sell your camp. It's the supervision, the care, and the program that you're putting across. And we focus an awful lot of time and attention on that. And we rebuild the program every year to keep it fresh and keep it exciting and add new programs. And I think that's helped us remain competitive.
Now, many people think of camp as a rich kid's getaway. It's expensive, but you found ways to make it more affordable for some families. Can you elaborate a little bit on scope and how effective it's been?
I think 1990, in the fall of 1990, I was at a camp conference in Harriman State Park as a conference center there, I think. And we were sitting around talking about the trouble that not-for-profit camps were having financially, and some were closing. At the same time, because I was always interested in politics, I was really bothered by, in the early 90s, the amount of shootings and killings of kids, random shootings in the Bronx and Brooklyn, other places, because of drug culture and the rest that was going on. Particularly in the summer, there were an awful lot of kids getting killed. And then you were hearing at the same time that kids were dropping out of school. So I was sitting around listening to everybody in this round table about not-for-profit camps, and it just struck me immediately, geez, I came up with a good idea. If we just raised money to help the not-for-profit camps, at the same time taking kids out of the inner city where they were getting shot during the summer, just standing on the street corner because of these drug dealers or what have you, gangs that were going bad, we'd be doing two good things. And then if you added into it a requirement that they just have to stay in school, also keeping kids off the street during the winter, in order to get the reward of camp, it seemed to me like a big win. At the same time, for private camp owners, what's the incentive? There was a lot of talk about people thinking about the all-year school, which would have been a big threat to camp. So I was able to sell it to private camp owners as, look, if we do this, it's a great counterweight to any argument about the all-year school. And at the same time, we're helping kids. We're helping the not-for-profit camps. It came around the American Camp Association when I sold it to them, bought into it immediately. I recruited Doug Pierce, who was a leader in the day camp industry, to help, and he was a tremendous help in raising money. He became my vice chair in the Scope program, and he's a co-founder in my mind, and he is a co-founder of Scope. Worked very hard to make it a success, and together with other camp directors, we've built a program now that coming on our major fundraiser, biggest fundraiser this spring, coming right up upon us. We're going to raise I think it's $1.2 million at that event. So we're putting lots of kids into camp. And now what we've also done, and I'm helping to fund, is we're taking these kids who make it through the program, stay in school, go every summer to one of our Scope camps, the not-for-profit camps, and then we want them to go on to college while we're helping to pay for their college education. So that's the next piece, because we believe, and I believe very strongly, that if you get a college education, it certainly, as the statistics show, increases your chances to have a much better income for the life ahead. And that's really what the American dream is all about, isn't it? So, anything we can do to promote that and to help it along, that I think is a great thing. That's doing some great work. And that's what I think Scope's about.
How many, I think you've helped already. How many kids? 2,500, 25,000? I forget the exact number, but it's a lot.
There are thousands of children. We send, I think, 1,500 campers a year now to camp.
It'd be nice to follow some of them and see where they end up. You did mention the American Camp Association, and you are very involved with those groups. How important do you think they are to camp in general?
Well, the American Camp Association is very important. First of all, it brings us all together. And, camp is a collegial profession more than a cutthroat competitive profession. I think the American Camp Association helps promote that. And that's very important. And they have educational sessions. They, when something cutting edge comes out that we need to know about, they're on it and they're helpful in providing that information. They're a lobbying organization as well associated with them. So if there are issues in Washington that we have to address, they're very helpful. And of course, they run these large conferences. They've got the national conference. We have the Tri-State Camp Conference every spring. It's the largest camp conference in the world, bringing together camp professionals, vendors, experts in the field. David Brooks, the writer for the New York Times, was our keynote this year. He was fabulous. So I think it's a very important organization. I was proud to be a part of it and proud to still be actively involved.
You get a lot out of it, basically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
First, let's just talk before we get to your other career, although that led nicely into it. Where will camps be in 2026 and beyond, do you think?
Well, we've got a bumpy economic environment coming up, but I think if camps address it properly, we'll get through that as we've gotten through others. I think every year is a growing year. Every year is a year to learn and evolve, and camp will evolve and will continue to do so. And I think the more that we can sell to the public at large the benefits of camp for children, the better we are. We're in a competitive environment right now, competitive situation with China. People's Republic of China. And I think what's very interesting is that China likes to send lots of their children to American camps, and they want to build American style camps in China. In fact, that was a trend a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, very aggressively. And when I talked to some of the folks from China about what the attraction was, they were very clear that their children are getting phenomenal education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, but the creative aspect is what they're lacking. And what the American child gets in places like camp is an environment that allows them to develop those creative skills that are so necessary to building the type of future economy that this country needs. So when the people across the American nation get an idea of how important the camp experience can be, I think camp will grow as a part of the experiences children can enjoy during the summers. We don't see enough of America's children going to camps yet, and hopefully over the years, with the help of the American Camp Association, that'll grow.
You did take a big hit during COVID. Camps did, that is, but managed somehow to survive, and with or without the help of China, I might add.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second about your other career, politics. Where did that come from?
Well, I've always loved history, and I've always loved the political scene. I got involved back in the mid-'90s, and lo and behold, I ended up becoming the Nassau County Democratic Chair. Never thought I was going to do that, but I was asked to do it, and did it in 2001, becoming the chair. I've been the chair ever since, still am the chair in Nassau County.
Which is a very big county.
Yes, 1.4 million people. And then David Patterson, the governor at the time, back in 2009, asked me to also take on, in addition, the state chairmanship, which I did. Of course, he had to not run again. I was the one who had to tell him it was a better idea for him not to run again. And Andrew Cuomo became the governor. I served with him for about a year and a half into his term before he was looking for somebody that was a little less independent, perhaps. So I stepped down. There was about a 5-year hiatus, and then he asked me to come back because they needed someone to help guide the party through the Trump first term and into that election. And I've been the state chair ever since, and still am the state chair.
Well, I believe you are the one who did tell Governor at that time, Andrew Cuomo, to step down amidst the sexual assault and nursing home allegations. That must have been a pretty heady time. Now, of course, he's running for mayor of New York. We won't get into that. But how do you manage to stay on top of that with your day-to-day running of Timberlake and the other camps, which is, in today's world, a full-time, year-round job?
I think developing really good people and working with really very good people who help me in both those spheres. I've got a team on the political side, and I've got a team on the camp side. I don't think you could beat that team anywhere. They're just excellent. And, I learned how to delegate a long time ago. It was a necessity. So when you learn how to delegate and at the same time become a good time manager, those two things are really required to be able to do all of this. I also am able to determine what's important, what's urgent, what can wait, what meetings I don't have to take and someone else can take, and what decisions I don't have to make and someone else can make. But I make sure that I'm available to make those decisions, which I think require my attention. And, over time, I've developed that ability. I think it's not perfect, again, like everything else. And again, you work a lot of hours, but I enjoy the work. So if you enjoy what you're doing, I think you're going to tend to have a better chance of doing it well.
Thank you for taking this meeting, by the way. This is not actually related, but I did read a story about you receiving a letter from LBJ, the last letter that he wrote. It's a wonderful story. Would you mind telling it?
Sure. When Lyndon Johnson retired, he wrote his autobiography, The Vantage Point. I read it. He was down at the ranch, the LBJ ranch. Midway through, I wrote him a letter talking about it. I think I was 16 at the time. And he wrote me back a nice letter and said, I'd be interested in hearing from you when you've completed it. Well, I completed it in December of 72, and I wrote him a letter about it. And then in January of 73, I think on the 22nd or so, 22nd, 23rd of January, he passed away. He died in his sleep taking a nap after lunch. And I felt very badly about that. Of course, about 10 days later, I got a package in the mail, and it was from his secretary, Mary Rather, from the LBJ Ranch. And it had in the letter, her letter explaining the letter that she had transcribed that Lyndon Johnson had dictated to me just before having lunch and then taking the nap that he never woke up from. That letter from Mary Rather explained all of that. I took it down to the LBJ library some years later and had it verified. It was probably his last letter. And Lady Bird Johnson heard about it and wrote me and asked me to bequeath it to the library when I'm gone. So that began a collection for me, or a hobby. I began collecting a lot of historical documents, memorabilia, and the like, and built a collection up that way that I enjoy. But that's the prize of the whole.
Well, it certainly sounds like you get some satisfaction from your political work, and that's a wonderful story, the last letter that he wrote. And I assume you will bequeath it to the library.
Yes, I will.
I would like to sort of close out on a quote from a family. It's on your website, actually, who wrote about their 3 sons going to your camp. And it started off with the mother saying, "How could I send my son away for 7 weeks? My son," which, rings true for so many parents. But they wrote, "The confidence and independence gained during their 7 weeks remains with them, our sons, for the additional 45 weeks of the year. They are encouraged to step outside of their comfort zone in a loving and supportive environment and be their best selves at camp. The pressures of school, sports, and social media seem to slip away with that first breathtaking glance at Saddle Mountain," which is Timberlake Camp. That's a beautiful testament to the camp and your work. So I can sort of understand why that takes priority in your life.
I very much enjoy it, and I very much enjoy most of all the things I do. Just sitting around talking with campers and even the counselors too. I enjoy it tremendously. I get a lot out of it. Hopefully they get something out of it. And, I'm just looking forward to another summer coming up right now in about 80 days. So I can't wait. And that's the best time of my year.
Right. Well, thank you very much for being with us and sharing your dream, Jay. I really appreciate it. And good luck with all of your endeavors. This has been a podcast brought to you by AM Skyer, a third-generation family insurance business started in 1920. I'm your host, Lisa Champeau. Talk to you next time.